My faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior.
Hi everyone, welcome to week 3 of our Crazy Love Book Club. And today we are going over chapters 6 and 7. And I know I like to start out with just the announcements. If you are unaware of the book club, we are reading a book called Crazy Love by Francis Chan. And we're doing that for the month of March along with a fast. You can go on my website at www.trinitylovetemple.org to catch up and find out more information. Yeah, I also wanted to say happy St. Patrick's Day to those of you who celebrate it. I have my little gear. I like to celebrate and decorate as long as it isn't anything crazy. And my little research that I did told me that he converted people to Christianity, and we offer that over here. So I had to wear my green and gold. So let's get right into this week's study. So chapter 6 is called When You're in Love. So this chapter was all about serving God out of love and not out of guilt or obligation. Because when we serve out of guilt or obligation, it feels like a chore. But when you're serving God out of love, it flows naturally. Just like when you're in love with a human in human form, you are excited to serve them. You are excited to spend time with them. You are excited about things that they are excited about because you genuinely love them. It's not an obligation like, oh, let me call this person I love, or oh, let me text this person I love, or oh, let me set up some time to spend with them. Like that isn't how it goes. But sometimes with our relationship with God, we treat the things that He desires for us to do like chores. But as we're learning and getting closer to Him, and as we realize how big His heart is and how much He loves us, we start to understand the things that He's called us to are out of love because He loves and wants to protect us. And also, as we're getting closer to Him, we want to do those things naturally. It just kind of flows naturally instead of feeling like a task or a list. And as we're thinking about loving God and even learning how to love God in a deeper way, we need help. Like we need God's help in order to love Him. Like we can't even love Him on our own. So we need His help, and He wants us to come to Him asking for help and not feeling like we have to, get ourselves together or we have to already have it figured out before coming to Him. That defeats the whole purpose. We have to come to Him asking Him to help us love Him more. And even if we have found ourselves doing things out of routine or out of habit and not out of love, to ask Him to help change our heart so that we can love Him more and breathe Him so that it can flow naturally. And He can help, He can help us change our perspective of Him and of how we walk out this life with Him. One of the quotes that Francis Chan says is, "As long as we are pursuing Him, we are satisfied in Him. It is when we stop actively loving Him that we find ourselves restless and gravitating towards other means of fulfillment." So God wants to fulfill us, right? And so as long as we're running and chasing after Him and through love and loving Him, we're going to be fulfilled and satisfied. Once we stop doing that, that's when we start seeking fulfillment in other things. It's not that God stopped fulfilling us. We just stopped longing and thirsting for it in whatever season or times in our life where we feel unfulfilled by God and we feel like running to other things, or we just find ourselves naturally sliding into other things. It's because at some point our shift changed from focusing on God and loving God into satisfying ourselves with other means, and we'll never be satisfied. So as we continue focusing on learning how to love God more and learning how to love God deeper, we will constantly be fulfilled by Him. And I think sometimes we feel like we're disconnected from God when we're facing suffering and hardship, when that's the exact opposite. God allows suffering and hardship to bring us closer to Him. Heck, He sent Jesus down to fully suffer for us, to take on our sin. So that is part of it, and we cannot allow the perspective of trouble equals a disconnect from God to run our life. We have to be kind of glad to suffer for him. Francis Chan quotes or talks about how in Acts 5 verses 40 through 42, the apostles went through some suffering for Christ and they rejoiced in that suffering. They rejoiced in it. I don't know why I did that. They rejoiced in that suffering. And I know that sounds weird because even as I'm saying it, even when I read it, I'm like, rejoicing? Like, oh my gosh. But that's what he calls us to. It is a privilege to suffer for Christ because he chose us and he loves us. And having to wrap our head around that seems weird. At least for me it does. And I'm just like, Lord, like everything is supposed to be roses and sunshine. And it is not. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that. So we just need to embrace suffering in a different way. And for those of you who might be like me, we have to stop assuming that suffering means something bad. It is good. It is growing us. It is building our character. And I know it doesn't feel good. Believe me, I know. I'm living it. I'm walking it. It does not feel good. I don't want it. But I also know that it's necessary. And I also know that God is breathing and moving through that. And we just have to get to a place where we stop either getting mad at God or running away from God when suffering is happening, or asking him to take it away, and learning how to ask him to help us through it, to teach us through it, because that's what he wants to do anyway, and that's what he's going to do anyway, whether we pay attention to it or not. So enjoy the suffering. I can't say enjoy the suffering. Enjoy the lessons through the suffering and trying to focus on him through it instead of on ourselves and anything else. And loving on him will help us understand suffering better, because the ultimate action of love was Jesus dying on the cross, and that was complete suffering. So as we learn to change our perspective of suffering, we'll start to understand that suffering is an aspect of love. And so, I'm talking to myself. I'm trying to learn. Literally, that is something I have to learn every minute. I can't even say every day. Every minute I'm trying to learn, because this journey for me is not very easy. And I'm just always, I have always prayed like, God, take it away, or take this away, or change this. And God is growing me so much through it. So I just encourage you, anybody, who is struggling through the suffering aspects and wondering why you're still going through certain things, and just change your prayer and change your perspective of suffering, and even your perspective of God and what his love means. And do not let suffering take that away. And just lastly, in the chapter, he talks a lot, again, about serving God and working for God out of love and not obligation. And another quote that I want to read, he says, when we work for Christ out of obligation, it feels like work. But when we truly love Christ, our work is a manifestation of that love, and it feels like love. So again, when we're thinking about serving Christ, and just think about just loving Christ, not even thinking about serving Christ, thinking about loving Christ and getting in tune with his heart and what he loves, through that, serving will automatically manifest. And when you're loving Christ, you can't sin. You cannot love Christ and sin at the same time. They cannot reside together. They can't. And so because we're not perfect, we can't love Christ 24/7. No, but the more we focus on loving Christ, the less sin will happen. And so the focus shouldn't be to stop sinning. The focus should be to love Christ. And the more we love Christ, the less we will sin. And I think that would just help us continue or begin to change our perspective of what loving Christ means, and how serving is a manifestation of love. So serving is a result, not the starting point, and then, fit love in there maybe, or I'm just serving as the obligation. Okay, and then chapter 7 was called Your Best Life, ... later. And so this chapter was a lot about, I'll get myself together when, or I can do what I want now and just chill out. And I have time, I have time to start taking my relationship with Christ more serious. I have time to draw deeper into my devotion to him later. Like I can do that later. Like I'm good now. I just kind of want to do what I want. YOLO. Ain't that what the young folks say? Or maybe they used to say that. Maybe I'm a few years late. But y'all know what I mean. Live my life now. And I know people have heard people say, well, when I get myself together, that's when I'm going to go to church. And when I get myself together, that's when I'll give my life to Christ. And it's like, we can't. You cannot get yourself together. So it's no point in doing that. And like the next second is not promised. So we can't just assume, oh, tomorrow, or oh, next week, or oh, next Monday, or the first of the month. Like now. Now, one of the quotes that he says is, something is wrong when our life makes sense to unbelievers. Something is wrong when our life makes sense to unbelievers. If you are a follower of Christ, a believer of Christ, and well, I should say, if you are a follower of Christ, because you can believe in God and not be following him. So if you are a follower of Christ and you proclaim him and you are living it out, but your life looks the same as unbelievers, and your life makes complete sense to the unbelievers and to the world, and you fit right in, something is missing. It's probably Christ. That's probably the thing that's missing, because there's no way that we can be actively running towards Christ and completely fit into the world. It's impossible. There's no way. We're supposed to be in the world, not of it. So there's no way that we can actively be following Christ and actively fit 100% in the world. So if we feel like we're living our best life and we're a follower of Christ, but we fit completely into the world, something's missing. It's not really your best life. And so part of living like the world and fitting completely into the world is being satisfied with, or finding comfort in what you have and what you can see and planning and control, and not finding comfort in God and what he can provide and what he's called you to. So from the world standpoint, you need to have this amount saved up, and you need to do what makes sense to the world, have your little saving plan, have, everything set up, which there's wisdom in that. So don't get it confused. But if God calls you to sell everything and move and do missions overseas, would you do that? Would that make sense? Would you still serve God the same way if you didn't know when your next paycheck was coming? Or if you didn't have a certain amount of savings saved up? If literally every day you had to pray to God for your basic needs. And one of the last things he ends the chapter with is a question: what are you doing now that requires faith? I think in this world, we're really caught up in knowing everything and having everything controlled, and just, having the next step planned out. Like we know that the next second is going to happen, right? But what actually are you doing that requires faith? I think that part of the reason why we experience hardship and suffering, because sometimes that's the only time when we're really expecting something from God and expecting something that only he can do, that we can't control, we can't pre-plan, there's nothing we can do about it. We have to completely and totally depend on Christ for the thing to pass, right? And so people who are struggling financially may not know when their next meal is coming, or they may not actually know how their next bill is going to get paid, right? And so that faith is different than somebody who has all their bills paid. They don't ever have to struggle for anything. Maybe that's the rich and wealthy. They never have to struggle for anything, right? And so, and nothing's wrong with that to a certain extent, but there should always be a point, and there should always be something that we need faith for. We shouldn't have everything figured out all the time. If our life is comfortable, completely comfortable, and we feel like we know everything and we're not trusting or expecting God for anything, then something's wrong. God doesn't call us to be comfortable. So if we're completely comfortable, we're not being challenged to have faith in him at all. So we really just need to think about that and reflect on that. It should be a challenge. We shouldn't be comfortable. We should be challenged. So I just want to encourage us in that way. So yeah, that is all for this week. And for those of you who don't know, there is always a blog that's connected to my Tuesday videos, and the blog link is going to be in the description box below. So check that out. And it's the same subject as the video. It'll just have more details about certain things and scripture references. So if you're interested in reading that, make sure you check that out. And next week we will be reading chapters 8 through 10, or going over chapters 8 through 10, and that'll be the last week of the book club. So make sure you all come back next Tuesday and join me then. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember to love always. Bye.
I am yours and you are mine.